The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to another English Australia webinar, this time on a Wednesday rather than a Thursday. So I'm so glad you could all join us for the session today. Now before we get into the session itself, can I please check that you can hear me and see my screen? Please type in yes in your chat boxes if you can see me and hear me okay. Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Kim. Thanks. Excellent. Today's session is called A Culture of Growth, Teacher Development at Monash. Now, you might know that Jennifer and her team presented this session at the 2015 English Australia Conference in September in Brisbane last year. This session is really valuable to share with everyone because as we know and we've experienced, developing professional development for teachers and catering to individual requirements as opposed to the team requirements, keeping your strategic goals in mind and bringing it all together is extremely challenging. And some of these issues will be addressed by Jennifer and her team today. So our presenters for today are Jennifer Costa, who is the Associate Director of Learning and Teaching at Monash University English Language Centre, and she's responsible for the strategic direction of the learning and teaching team. We also have Mark Rooney, who we've heard and not so much seen, Mark, but we've heard you on one of our earlier webinars last year. Mark's been teaching English for 10 years, and he's been with Monash University for 2 years now. We also have Susan Derrick-Penns, who has a lot of experience. Susan's been teaching for over 30 years now, and she's been at Monash since 2008. Is that correct, Susan?
That's right, yeah.
So welcome everyone, and over to you, Jenny.
Okay, thanks Aparna for that introduction. Just going to click on the slide, Aparna.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, well, good afternoon, and as Aparna said, my name's Jenny and I'm the Associate Director of the Learning and Teaching Centre at Monash University. I'm joined here today by Susan Derrick-Penns and Mark Rooney, who are teacher developers here at the centre. And I thought before we get started on our talk, it was important just to give you a bit of an overview of our context. We have two campuses here at Monash University English Language Centre. We've got our city campus, which is in the centre of Melbourne, and we have our Clayton campus, which is located in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, for those of you who aren't so familiar with Melbourne. At the city campus, we teach Monash English, which is basically an English proficiency course for students from an elementary level through to an advanced level of English. And as what would probably happen in many centres, at the elementary level, there's a greater focus on general English, and at the advanced levels, there's a greater focus on EAP. At the Clayton campus, we have our direct entry programs for students on a pathway to diplomas or university. And these courses are 15 or 10 weeks in duration. They're task-based programs. And the students in these programs have just missed out on meeting the English language proficiency requirements for their destination courses. So I'm going to go back in time to 2013, which is when we conducted an internal analysis of the Language Centre, and we looked at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. 90% of the weaknesses that we identified at that time were related to performance and professional development issues and included a lack of clarity in regards to people's roles, inconsistent performance across teaching teams, ineffective leadership support, lack of feedback and consultation, professional development lacking a strategic focus, and not providing enough stretch for individuals, and a lack of resources focusing on teachers' professional development. So we were in a bit of a mess. Okay. Aparna, just if you could go to the next slide. It's not responding, Grace. At the same time that we were experiencing these issues, we entered into a period of unprecedented growth, which required a significant increase in our teaching staff. And like many other centres in a similar position, it meant that we needed to recruit graduates that had a very limited teaching experience. Okay, just on the next slide. Okay, Aparna, if you could go to the next slide and I'll keep talking. I think there's a bit of a delay.
Jenny, I can see the opportunity slide now. Is that the one you want?
Yes, that's correct.
It's
Thank
on
you.
the screen, yes.
Yep, wonderful. All right, so sorry about that. So MULC, like many other centres, I'm sure, is striving to be a leader in language teaching and understands that in order to do that, we need to provide well-prepared students to the university. Now, we can only achieve those goals if we support, motivate and encourage teacher innovation across the centre, and you can clearly see that in 2013 we had a lot of problems. So today in our presentation, we want to provide you with an overview of how we introduced a new performance review process, teacher observations and micro-PDs across the centre to enable us to look ahead and change the way we approach teacher development, address our challenges and how we made the most of this opportunity to develop a culture of growth. Yep, so Aparna, I'll need you to click again.
Okay. Am I just
So if we
reset?
go to the,
Am I just reset
sure.
your settings? Okay, do you want to give it a go, Jenny?
Yes, thanks.
There you go.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll start by looking at the performance review. So the first step was to develop developing the culture of growth was required a redesign of the centre's performance review process. And like I think many other performance review processes in schools, our centre's process was designed for administrators rather than teaching staff. Missing from the review process were discussions about student performance, the learning and teaching plan, the role each individual teacher played in us succeeding that plan, the areas of instruction a teacher required development in, and then the support that was required to help teachers reach their goals. Feedback from our staff had consistent themes. The teachers didn't want their performance review forms to have repetition of information or comment on performance of tasks that were required for them to do every day in the job. They wanted to know what was expected of them. They wanted a process that valued the skills and strategies required to be a good teacher. And they wanted to target their individual professional development. And obviously, and you won't be surprised, they wanted everything to be in a user-friendly document that didn't require hours to complete. So the redesign process. So the review began with looking at the literature on teacher performance development and a review of documents used by other divisions within Monash College. Then I followed an analysis of current practices in other university language centres, and finally I looked at models and critiqued competency frameworks from English Australia, the British Association of Lecturers for English for Academic Purposes, that's a bit of a mouthful, and the Department of Education and what they're working with their teaching staff. So this research, combined with a number of teacher and manager focus groups, led to the development of the Best Practice Learning and Teaching, a guide for teacher development, which you can hopefully see in front of you right now. And inside that guide, what we've done is we've articulated to our teaching staff the purpose of the centre's performance review process. We've provided details of the cycle and how the teachers can prepare for the cycle. And we've also included a number of self-assessment tools that teachers need to complete as they prepare for their review. Okay. So one of the key self-assessment tools inside the guide is the profiling grid, which encourages teachers to self-reflect on their teaching methodology and skills, assessment capabilities, lesson and course planning, intercultural competence, language awareness, blended learning, professional conduct, and administration. They're then required to decide whether their skills in these areas are developing, mastering, or leading, and there's a bit of a rubric there to guide them with this. Another tool is the observation rubric, which outlines the centre's expectations of classroom teaching, and our teachers are observed at least once a year and encouraged to use this feedback to inform their annual goals. The final self-assessment inside the guide is an assessment that encourages teachers to look at the student performance data in their particular course area and reflect on areas where they could provide improved support for their learners. So the results of these 3 assessment areas are then used by the teachers to set 4 to 6 goals for the year using the SMART goal principles. You know, we want the teachers to set goals that are specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic and time-based. Together with their managers, teachers work through their goals to ensure they align not only with the centre's learning and teaching plan, but also their individual development needs. And they then discuss how they will measure the success of these goals and how the centre can support them with professional learning activities. Each teacher and their manager then come together in the middle of the year and the end of the year to look at how well they've achieved these goals, and then they set the agenda for the year to come. So what was the experience of us when we launched this process? Well, the launch of the new process did coincide with our enterprise bargaining discussions. So consequently, there was initial suspicion surrounding the process. It was really, really important to formally separate the performance review process from the negotiation process, which wasn't easy. And it was important to provide all staff with the opportunity to meet and discuss any feedback they had concerning the new performance review document and the process, and to talk through any concerns that they had. At the same time, I set up a Google site which had all of the documentation concerning the new process. It also included all of the research that backed it up. And there was also space on that site to talk about the consultations that we'd had, timeframes, reporting lines, and then a list of frequently asked questions that were coming up from the teachers. As the trial was delayed by staff consultations, it involved a 6-month cycle initially rather than a 12-month cycle. And it was agreed that we'd start off by trialling the process over the 6 months, and we gave the teachers the option of participating or not participating. And interestingly, 99% of the staff were very interested in participating in that trial, with one teacher deciding not to. We then made a commitment to review the process following the 6 months. So in February 2015, we did just that. We got staff together, we got them to complete surveys, and we listened to how they'd found things. The respondents felt that the new performance review process did clearly define what the centre currently believes is best practice teaching. Despite the issues managers experienced with the goal setting, they did find it hard to get people thinking about goals in terms of the SMART goal principles. The teachers commented that they found the goal setting process was very useful and provided them with motivation and direction. 77% were satisfied with the feedback they received during the performance review conversations. And those that didn't felt that it was more about the timing of when the conversations were happening, which was coinciding with heavy marking periods. Majority of the applicants found the new forms easy to use, and there was consistent feedback from the managers that teachers who were not satisfied with the process found the concept of goals, measures and professional learning activities difficult to understand. So, for the new performance review process to be a success, it was important for us to stand by what we were saying and honour the commitment to each individual teacher's development. So as a result, it was decided to assemble a teacher development team, which comprised of 3 qualified teacher trainers who would then embark on a comprehensive program of classroom observations and feedback, as well as a regular development opportunities in the form of micro-PDs, which Mark and Susan will talk about. And in this picture, you can see Mark in the middle. He'll be horrified that I've just identified that. But I'm going to hand over to Mark now, who's going to talk to you about the teacher observations.
Okay, hello everyone. This is Mark, a member of that team that Jenny has just talked about, the teacher development team, which was put together during the early stages of this process. Now, once Jenny got the team together, she really quickly tasked us with our first objective, and that was to establish a comprehensive program for our English Language Centre of observations. Now, that is no mean feat. No, it wasn't something that happened easy. Now, of course, we really wanted to help our teachers become better teachers, but how one goes about doing that, isn't the easiest task. So early on, we kind of set out the 3 main objectives we had around why we would have teacher observations. So the first of those was that we wanted to address each teacher's individual needs. Now, we believe that all teachers have unique strengths that make them good teachers, so we believe that the observations are a good way of helping us reach each individual and look at their own unique talents and needs. In addition to this, we really wanted to encourage self-development. So we want to encourage teachers to take ownership of their own professional development, for them to be aware of their own wants and needs regarding their growth. And finally, we wanted to discover the centre's professional development needs. So our centre is very much committed to providing PD sessions, and of course we want these sessions to fit the centre's needs. The observations were therefore a good tool for identifying what type of PD to provide, and Susan will talk a little bit about this later on. So at this stage of the process, I was feeling really, really positive about the whole thing. I was quite excited. I could see the future. I thought, okay, our team will go in, we'll observe the teachers, and we'll give them some feedback on their lessons. They'll thank us. They'll say, that's great. I'll definitely take that on board and do it straight away, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. But of course, I think that was a bit of hubris on my part. And I think Jenny was wise to this early on, because she suggested that maybe it might be a good idea before we start the observations to just walk around the staff room and gauge the temperature of the room, see how people were feeling about it. And she was quite wise to do so, because when we did go around and gauge the staff room, we were kind of, I wouldn't say shocked, but we found that not everyone was absolutely delighted about the concept of having classroom observations. A small group, and it was quite small, were outright opposed to it happening. They said, no way, we don't think it's fair to have observations. There was another group who were super positive about it. They were like, okay, we haven't had an observation for years. It'd be great to have someone to give me some feedback. I'd love to know how I'm going. But by far the biggest group was the one in the middle. This group weren't excited or depressed by the idea of observations. They just kind of accepted it. So most teachers generally seem to feel that it was an obligation, something management needed to be seen to be doing. They seem to feel that an observation was something they had to get through. It was something that they had to pass, like an exam. But of course, that was never our intention. And very quickly we realized that we had a bit of a PR problem on our hands regarding observations. And if we wanted the project to be a success, we had to be really careful about how we went about addressing it. Okay, so here are some of the challenges we faced and some of the solutions. So I think the main concern we had to address was that teachers were worried their jobs would be on the line. They felt that a bad observation could mean them losing hours or even their whole job. And if I'm honest, I can kind of understand why they might have thought this. Because for many teachers, observations are seen as punitive or evaluative. There is, a kind of a poor culture of observation in this country. And I think for a lot of teachers, the only time they get observed is when there's been a student complaint. So you might have noticed from my lack of THs, I'm Irish. But I've been in Australia for 8 years, and for the first 6 years of those, I was observed twice in the institutions I taught at. So I think for a lot of teachers, there seems to be a belief that if you're competent, you don't need to be observed. But I would ask, who just wants to be competent? Don't teachers have the right to get better? And don't we, as an institution, have a responsibility to help them do so. So the solution around this particular problem was that we have to get it across that these will not be evaluative or punitive. And so therefore, very early on, we got the message out there that observations were purely developmental in nature, which meant that the feedback on individuals would not and could not be fed back to managers. Basically, what happened in the observation was between the observer and the observee. Now, there was an exception, of course, for newly hired teachers. In this case, there was an initial observation, and what came out of that observation could be fed back to managers, and I think that was fair. But on the whole, it was a closed loop. Information did not go back to managers. Now, once we got this information out there, we found that a lot of teachers just didn't believe us. No matter how many times we stated that observations were purely developmental and the feedback was not given to managers, they seemed suspicious. And I wondered what the reason for this might be. And I kind of tend to think that teachers are a bit like abandoned children. You know, in the early days, when we do our CELTA course or our pre-service course, maybe it's in uni or a debate or something, we get loads of love and support from our tutors. Yeah, they help us, they're there to support us, they're there to advise us. But then the minute you qualify and you're out there in the classroom, you get very, very little attention from those above you. You don't get much help, you don't get much advice, you're kind of on your own. So then as a result of this, I think 10, 15, 20 years later, when someone like me comes up, knocks on the door and say, hey, can I come in and look at your classroom? They say, no, where have you been for the last 15 years? I didn't need you then, so I don't need you now. And that was one of the major problems we have, is having teachers led us back into the classroom. Now, the other main issue we faced was that a lot of teachers had negative past experiences around classroom observation. Some of the stories we heard back from teachers was that in the past they had found observations to be unhelpful and in some cases even detrimental to their teaching. So we found that this was often born from unskilled observers. And we've all had one of these. You know, the kind of observer who comes in and watches your lesson, and then when they talk to you about the lesson afterwards, they quickly listen to what you have to say, but as soon as they get a chance, they tell you, well, here's how I would have taught your lesson. Now, teachers, we found, don't really respond very greatly to this. You know, they want to develop themselves. They don't want to be told how to teach. They want to be able to find a way to develop themselves in the direction they would like to go. So we thought, how can we, make up for the trauma of past experiences that teachers had around observations? Well, first of all, we said across the team we had to be consistent in how we delivered them, and we had to be principled. So the first thing we did was standardize procedures. And by doing this, and if you want to do a similar experience, I highly recommend this stage. We got together and we all went, the 3 observers, and observed teachers together. So the 3 of us were in there watching volunteer teachers give their lessons. Now here we watched together, and then afterwards we talked about the lesson and thought about the best way to give the feedback to the teacher. And then when the feedback was given to the teacher, we all sat in on it together. Now, this was really, really useful, because not only did it give the project validity, but it also taught us a few things that we thought, okay, we're going to have to change this going forward. One of the main things we found was that the CELTA-Delta style of feedback, which we all had experience giving, was not appropriate in an established teaching environment where people were already qualified teachers. We found that the qualified and experienced teachers don't like to be held to standardized criteria. So if you're thinking of having some in-house development sessions, and you're going to use the CELTA-Delta style, maybe just pull back from that a minute and think about, is there another way you can approach it that's a bit more supportive of that particular individual style of teacher? And the last thing we got from the standardization process was that if we wanted the observations to be a positive experience for all parties, teachers and managers and teacher developers, then the onus was on us, the teacher developers, to make sure that the teachers were set up for success, that the process was in place, that everything would go well for them. And here's how we went about doing that. So we had 3 stages. The first one was the pre-observation stage. And the pre-observation stage, the first thing that happened was we sent out an email to the teachers. In the email, we told them the precise time of when the observation would happen. The precise time was negotiable. And in the email, we also stressed that the observations were purely developmental and that feedback would not be given to managers. Attached to the email was a lesson plan pro forma alongside a sample lesson plan. Now, we tried to keep this as labor-free for the teachers as possible, while still hoping to set them up for success. Now, you can see what the lesson plan pro forma looked like, and there's perhaps two things worth noting about the lesson plan. First of all, we didn't require teachers to write down any procedural steps or explanations. We didn't want to see what they would say for their instructions or the individual things and messages they would say to learners. Instead, we wanted them to focus on the overall lesson aim and then the aims for each stage of the lesson. In other words, we were much more interested in learning the why of their lesson rather than the how of their lesson. And this, we hoped and felt, would encourage more reflective teaching and hopefully a more philosophical conversation around the lesson, both before and after. And the second feature of note was here in the final section. Should come up here. There you go. And here we got the teachers to select the areas of the lesson they wanted feedback on. So we kind of hoped that this would encourage them to take ownership of the lesson. So here you can see highlighted in red, the teacher wanted us to focus on these three particular aspects. Now, whenever possible, the teachers and the observer would have a pre-observation chat where we talked about how we hoped the lesson would go. Again, took great pains in saying, don't worry, this is not going to be fed back up to manager. We also reassured them, don't feel bound by the lesson plan. If you feel like you need to go off piste a bit, that's fine. Anything that was emerging came up, that's fine. If you go over your times, that's fine. It's not a test. It's just an opportunity to reflect on your lesson. Okay, so once the pre-lesson stage had happened, then we got into the actual 45-minute classroom observation. So observations were approximately 45 minutes. Now, the next stage, the 45 in this of this process, we had to address the fact that it's a bit odd when someone comes into a teacher's classroom and gets involved. One of the most common complaints about observations is that they seem a bit unnatural. The teachers and the students feel self-conscious and a bit weird. The observer's mere presence alone can change the dynamic of the classroom. So therefore, we tried to be as benign an influence as possible. And we'd enter with a smile, say hello to everyone, and no computers. So it turns out that our teachers aren't too fond of someone doing clerical work, typing away at the back of the class. So we just used old-fashioned pen and paper, and personally I tried to look up, smile, laugh at the jokes, and be an interactive presence in the class, not necessarily interacting with the lesson, but being present and being seen to be present. We sat where we were asked to sit. Sometimes that was at the back, that's where they wanted us, but often it was in amongst the students, interacting with them as they did tasks, moving around and helping teachers monitor at other times. And I personally try to ignore the old, just pretend I'm not here kind of approach. First of all, I get enough of that at home, but also a common complaint about observations is that they're kind of unnatural. Everyone, including the learners, are feeling on edge, and but it's kind of normal that they would feel that something's a bit different when there's a human being in the back of the room taking up oxygen and taking up space in the class. So I choose not to be ignored. I'm there. Let's just accept that as normal. So once we'd done that, we observed a 45-minute lesson. We got to the next stage, which was the post-observation. So after the lesson, the teacher takes those handwritten notes, the observer takes those handwritten notes, and they type up the observation form, which looks a little bit like this. There you go. And here we give feedback on the areas the teacher requested attention, as well addressing some of the features outlined in the best practice guide that Jenny talked about earlier. And in the end, we gave an overall summary, and in the very final box, the teacher is invited to write their own reflections. Now, what's important to mention is that this document is emailed to the teacher well in advance of any post-observation conversation. So the teacher is given time to reflect on the lesson, absorb the comments, and note down any questions or ideas they might have. And in our experience, if you don't give the teachers the feedback in advance, it can often end up having quite a defensive encounter when we talk about the lesson. So as much time as possible for them to absorb the information is highly recommended. Then the teacher and the observer sit down and discuss the lesson post-lesson. So we find that we try and keep it as a conversation between peers. Now, we try not to be too dogmatic. Of course, we obviously have a lot of experience as teacher developers, but we are not there to tell people how they should teach. Often we're just opening doors for them, getting them to reflect on the way they do things, and whenever possible, learning from them, or certainly to be seen to be learning from them. Then after the conversation, we tried to keep in touch with the teacher regarding any of the issues that came up in the observation. Maybe passing on any articles on topics that came out of the lesson, comparing students' work, asking them how they're going on certain things just in the corridor. So just keeping the conversation going. So those are the 3 stages. So how are we doing? Well, here's some results. This is from last year. So up until I would say July of last year, we observed 150 individual teachers. But that was over 200 observations, as some teachers, especially newly qualified teachers, had 2, 3, or even 4 observations in that early developmental stage. From a survey we carried out, 81% of observations were helpful or very helpful. 81% of people said that they were really helpful. And 90% said that they will will put those ideas into practice in the future. So we are having an effect, which is the most pleasing information. And some of the comments we get back are really encouraging from the teachers. They show that the observations are doing what we want them to do, that they are, reaching their goals or reaching their objectives we have for them. But of course, it's not all positive. If we look at the last one, some teachers are still resistant. They don't want to let us back necessarily into our lives just yet. They still have that sense of abandonment. But I genuinely believe that we can win them over. And we can win their trust, and we can win their respect. Because I think what we're doing here is principled, I think it's fair, and I think it's really teacher-centered. And if we continue to do so, and if we continue to treat teachers as individuals, and to help them become the teachers that they want to be, not the ones that we want them to be, I think we can have a positive effect on each and every one of them. And now, so that's the observation stage. I'm going to pass on to Susan, who will talk about our micro PDs.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan, and I'm going to talk about the micro PDs. Although we've always had PD sessions at Newell, they weren't regular and tended to focus more on introducing teaching staff to new procedures and protocols rather than exploring pedagogical issues. But from 2013, Newell began to organise more consistent PDs that, although they were one-off topics, had to rely on the availability of rooms and experienced staff to deliver them, and even sometimes cake to attract attendees. So, informed by our findings from the lesson observations, which began seriously in 2014, and in consultation with teachers in post-observation conversations, we felt that what we needed to establish was consistency. That is, there needed to be a regular time and place, and that the place had to be near the staff room. And also that the one-off PD session was not effective, and there needed to be more of a focus on development and more time devoted to becoming aware of issues and theories. So then we began to establish the PG. Firstly, why? In terms of personal development, teachers at our institution have varying qualifications and experience, and so we needed to engage and challenge all of them to prevent staleness or routine or even isolation. And then there's that study that was conducted by Michael Huberman that is mentioned often by Tessa Woodward about the varying number of years in service of a teacher and how that can affect their needs. They talk about the novice teacher with 1 to 3 years experience who really is in it for survival and can be shaken by the simultaneity and spontaneity of what actually happens in the classroom. And for them, it's a period of discovery. After 4 to 6 years, the teachers become stable. They're starting to make a commitment to teaching perhaps and have routines in terms of how they set up listening activities or set homework. And these teachers are more ready to seize the moment in the classroom. After 7 to 8 years experience, teachers are beginning to really experiment. They're doing what, I don't know whether it was Huberman or Tessa Woodward termed pedagogical tinkering. I like that. But 9 to 15 years in, they're exhausted. So regeneration is needed. They're thinking maybe I should leave teaching or change, or maybe some of them even get their second wind. And finally, the old crew like me with 19 to 30 years experience, well, they're either serene, they accept change, or maybe have a slight nostalgia for the way things used to be, or else they're totally disengaged and maybe slightly bitter. Anyway, so we needed to challenge all those teachers. Then we needed to support in a more general sense the newly qualified in areas of insecurity. And we really wanted to create the idea of a more collaborative teaching environment where teachers were unafraid to ask for help and advice if they needed it. Teaching, as we know, can be very isolating. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we needed to care for those abandoned children. Last week, we needed to improve the teaching quality at Newark. Jenny mentioned that Monash College has been growing and will continue to grow. We teach high-stake courses here, and our students are on pathways that affect time, and also it's important for us to consider that the teaching needs to be very efficient and cover as much of the syllabus in that time as we can. So, when and where? Well, as I mentioned before, we needed a consistency of time and place. The current schedule allowed us to deliver half-hour PDs in 3 weeks out of every 5. So we teach in 5-week blocks. Complication is that we have a split shift timetable and lots of part-time teachers. So overall, it would be 4 sessions of the same PD, 3 weeks out of 5. And the idea would be that we created a momentum for these PDs that teachers could rely on and build into their weekly schedules. And it would always be in the same room, which is actually part of the staff room space, so no need to walk very far. So yeah, 30-minute sessions, 4 time slots, and the idea of building momentum. So designing the PD. Well, we sat down in December 2004 and planned the schedule, and this was informed by what we'd observed in the lesson observations, as well as the post-observation conversations, which often allowed teachers to talk about those areas of their teaching they either felt secure about or wanted to explore further. Added to this, we did send out a questionnaire to teachers to find out what they wanted to focus on. And lastly, the centre needs were important considerations. We have a new curricula at all levels, and the focus is very much on EAP. 2015 was also the year of blended learning at Newell, so we wanted to incorporate the use of online technology into all our sessions. And the how? Well, in order to provoke uptake and engagement, it was decided that we'd focus on a theme per term. So there'd be 3 sessions on a theme, aims, say, and that these were going to be participant-centered, interactive, and really oriented towards inquiry, so that teachers could really feel the potential these sessions had for stimulating their professional growth. We wanted to encourage implementation and reporting back in the following PD session, but we had to realize that, of course, sometimes we were just planting a seed that teachers might latch onto and become curious about exploring in their own time. So here's a sample of a sample skweet. The first one, aims. This was from 2015. And session 1 explored the notion of appropriate aims and the fact that teachers needed to be very, very clear about what they're teaching and why in order to avoid just covering material. Think of listening practice, for example. Often teachers just go through the motions but don't have very clear aims that they're designed to achieve. In session 2, we took a double-page spread from a course book in order to explore how achieving aims would mean that teachers may have to adapt the material or supplement it or even omit certain activities on the page. And finally, in session 3, we looked at the long view, how the daily aims fed into what we wanted to achieve every week, the outcomes, and then how these were going to be reflected in the termly assessment part in order to help teachers target their approach more. And of course, it does help that all three of us are teachers, so we do understand the strains and stresses. Next slide. Isn't happening. Oh, yes, here it comes. So here's the plan for the micro PDs in 2015. We designed in that December 2014, we designed a 6-month program, and then we planned as we went along, made adjustments according to what came up. So for example, if you can look in term 5, what was there was replaced by a suite devoted to Chinese learners. They're our biggest cohort, and there had been some issues with them. So the suite comprised of culture, expectations, and linguistic issues. So the results. Well, results for teachers and results for MUA. Results have been positive, with a mixture of both newly qualified and experienced teachers attending. And even from the beginning, there has been an ever-growing core of people who attend all the sessions. It's, of course, a slow build. It's helped by word of mouth, and really, if it's worth it, they will attend. We've seen enthusiasm for trying out new strategies and ideas, and lots of people even come back and talk to us about them and share them with their colleagues. All the articles that we use for our research and the worksheets that we use in the micro PDs are posted onto a shared drive for every staff member to have access, so that if they are inspired to find a passion with ELT, and I certainly hope they are, then they can kick off by consulting those seminal articles. We're trying to also promote an action teaching approach, so test, see, and observe. In term 4, in fact, we ran a suite of PDs on action research, and this has encouraged people, teachers, to present at our own in-house PDs, which are run on public holidays, and also even at English Australia events. Teachers now feel safe enough with us to show us their insecurities and vulnerabilities, and this is all positive, and it has meant that many teachers feel even that it's the best part of working at MUAL, the fact that they're growing. When you consider that every year, if a teacher attended our micro PDs, that they could accrue the same number of hours that they would do on a 2-week full-time ELT course. It's quite considerable. And it has to be mentioned that we're teaching the kind of things that CELTA doesn't have time to go into. So the results of NUALC, well, there is better learning and teaching. So clearly results here. Surveys show that students are happier, and results including IELTS scores are up, so that also reflects well on the teaching. Also, NUALC is able to attract and retain a higher caliber of teacher, which is the payoff for what Jenny was talking about in terms of investing in teachers and teacher developers. The culture of growth. Teachers want to get more out of what they do. There's been a growth in the number of teachers doing part-time MA courses and gaining more experience and expertise in various areas of teaching. And all this, of course, just increases NUALC's intellectual wealth. Now, the PDs are voluntary, and as sessionals couldn't be paid to attend, we thought that we could recognise their participation by issuing each participant with a certificate of attendance, detailing the sessions they attended and any presentations they've given. This would serve teachers with a personal record for their own benefit, but could also be used on CVs and even help them with VIT qualification and registration. Teachers have been very generous with their appreciation. I feel a bit embarrassed showing you these things, but it's yeah, it's quite rewarding. So the future. We want, it's a work in progress. We're now in term 2 of 2006. We want to encourage a higher uptake of ideas, possibly by embedding the curricula into the PDs and weaving out PD themes around this. We're thinking of doing short intensive courses for teachers in our non-teaching weeks. We're now going to a 9-term teaching year. And also involving teachers in presenting things at PDs as well. I think we have something unique happening, but we're not complacent, and we'd love to talk with any of you doing similar work and are now available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Mark, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
While we wait for our attendees to type in some of their questions, I've got one to start us off. Mark and Susan, this is mainly about post-observation conversations. Does the reflection on the part of the teacher sometimes echo the things that you have identified when observing them?
Quite often.
Yeah, a lot of the time, yeah. I would say teachers are relatively self-aware of when things work and when they don't work. Mm-hmm. And that kind of speaks to what I was saying about, so people ask me, what do you mean you don't do the CELTA-Delta model of feedback? We try and avoid the testing them to show us how they felt it went, or showing us that they know or are self-aware how it went. I think they are self-aware, and I think when you ask them questions like, so when they didn't stand up and walk around when you asked them to, why do you think that happened? I think that frustrates them. I think they feel like it's an evaluation or a test. So we're a bit more explicit about talking about things instead of constantly trying to draw everything out of them.
Quite often it all comes from them anyway. They'll bring up something that they didn't feel worked very well, and then that's something that we can explore with them. Well, of course, we talk about things that do work well as well.
Yep. With the kind of lessons and the pro forma that you send out in the initial email, are there skills that you want teachers to show you? My question really is about, how are the topics for the observations or the lessons picked or decided on?
the teacher decides on it, so it's very much directed by them. I mean, we have a syllabus here, so the day that the observation is on, it's obviously they've got to cover the syllabus there, but they might say, well, can you come in the second hour because I'm doing a reading and I'd like to get some feedback on how I approach reading.
Mm-hmm.
So they very much direct it. They teach a lesson as they would kind of teach a lesson, but they choose on what bits we focus on.
For the new teachers, we would like to see part of the lesson devoted to presentation of some kind of language, whether it's vocabulary or grammar.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the questions we have is about the length of the micro PD sessions. Is 30 minutes enough to tackle a single topic?
Well, it's not 30 minutes, 30 minutes. So it's an hour and a half on each topic, actually, but broken over 3 weeks.
Okay.
And quite a lot of this these days is becoming flipped. So it gives us more talking time during the actual 30 minutes. But you would be amazed if you're efficient how much you can get through in 30 minutes.
Yep.
But in the early days, it was kind of one topic, one session, and we realized that it wasn't sticking. So that's when we came up with the idea of themes and having it thematic. So 3 sessions, at the end of session 1, go away and try this, and we'll talk about it in the next session, then you build on that, and then you build on that again in the third one.
And so you have the same attendees at each of these sessions just to see how, I mean, is it consistent? They come to all of them to see how the conversation develops?
Usually, yeah. There are a lot of demands on our teachers here with inter-rater reliability sessions and level briefings. But in the main, because it is only 30 minutes, we're likely to get a higher attendance than if it was for an hour.
Aparna, if I could just jump in, it's
Yes.
Jenny speaking.
Yep.
The 30 minutes was a very conscious decision because there is a lot going on for teachers outside of their teaching time, and we did want to maximise the uptake of the micro PDs. So we thought that teachers would feel that they could manage 30 minutes more than 1 hour.
And there's no cake anymore.
Oh. No, you've taken away the biggest incentive. No cake.
No. We just feed them differently.
Okay, great. We do have a question about the observers and the group of teachers who observe the other teachers. How big is this group?
Well,
Of observers?
Yes, Mark.
So at the moment, we've got 4. There's a team of 4 teacher developers who observe teachers.
Okay. I think the question here we have is, do you match the observers to the teachers, or how does that process work? How do you allocate teachers and personalities, really, and their pedagogical approach, level of interest? What is the criteria for matching them?
Can I, Aparna, I might start and then Mark and Susan can
Sure,
join
thank
in.
you.
But during the consultation process, there was quite a bit of discussion about that. And I think probably, as Mark mentioned in his, a lot of it was due to experiences that teachers had had. So initially what we said is that we would assign someone to observe teachers, and then if they felt uncomfortable who had been assigned to them, they could take it up with our manager of learning and teaching quality, and he would look at reassigning someone else to observe them. But I think that the process has gone well. There's definitely a lot of trust for the teacher developers and how they've delivered the feedback. So I don't think that it's actually been an issue.
No. But I think that is related to a lot of things we said. Like, we did everything we possibly could to make it successful. And I don't mean lowballing it in that sense. It's that we tried to be as encouraging and set them up for success, and having a long pre-stage and giving them enough time to absorb the information in the post-stage. So it was quite deliberate. We were aware that there could be a clash, but we were hyper-conscious of that not happening, and that's, I think, part of the success of the whole process was that because we were conscious of it, we took enough steps to ensure that those kind of things didn't happen.
Sometimes teachers will say, oh, person X observed me last time and I'd really like someone else to see me this time, or person X observed me last time, I really want him to see me and see how I've improved.
Yeah, and Aparna, just for the academic managers in the audience who might be thinking about doing this, well, Mark said there are 4 people. That, you know, they all have a teaching component to their role. So the amount of teaching developer time and the amount of teaching time does change across the year, because obviously when we've got periods where we have a high number of staff coming into the centre, we need them to have more time dedicated to the teacher developing side of things. And then in quieter times of the year, like for example now for us, they would focus more on the teaching.
Yep, sure. You're right, Jenny. Some of the comments and questions coming through are mainly from academic managers trying to think about ways of setting this up. So another question we had is about peer observations and how this fits in within your framework. Our teachers who are not teacher developers, are they able to observe other teachers?
Yeah. So we do, that is part of the service, I guess, that the teacher developers can arrange peer observations for staff. And also when we are recruiting teachers, we also offer them the opportunity to go in and observe a class, if it can be managed, to help alleviate some of those nerves that people have before they step into a classroom for the first time at a new centre. Mark and Susan, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, this month is one of our quieter months regarding new teachers being taken on board, so the teacher developers have been freed up a bit. So this term especially, we've done a lot of peer observations. One is the autonomous one where anyone can watch anyone in their own time, so come in on your day off or come in the afternoon, and we stay out of that. Then we try and accommodate peer observations where I will go in and cover your class while you observe someone else, and we give a little rubric that teachers can watch each other with, but we are as closer as far as the teachers want us to be. And then the final one is where I or another teacher developer will go in and teach your class for an hour while you watch me, and that way it's very targeted. So often that kind of dovetails lovely with the micro PD. So someone might say, "Oh, Mark, you talked about doing a diagnostic listening lesson. Can I see what it looks like?" And then I'll go into their class and teach it for an hour, and they can see it in action. So there's those 3 kind of streams around up. Beyond me watching them, there's those 3 other options they have to use teacher developers for.
Mark, thank you. A few more questions. One is on the kind of training and preparation time that teacher developers are given and the kind of support they have. Sorry, let me just find that question so I can word it appropriately. Do you give observers some training on how to give feedback to various teachers?
Yeah. So, Aparna, when we entered into this, we, again, through the consultation process, we received a lot of feedback from staff that the people we put into these roles needed to have a teacher training background. And so we consciously chose people who do have experience with teacher training. Because you do have to carefully manage the feedback and how that's delivered to teachers for it all to be a success. In order how we manage the time, the teacher developers are now in a specific role, which is classed as a developer coordinator. There is X amount of time across the year that they're required to teach, and X amount of time across the year where they've got release to focus on the teacher developer side of things. But the manager of learning and teaching quality has really looked across the year at the pressure points that come up and identified with the teacher developers input when will be good terms for them to actually be completely in the classroom, so that they keep in touch with what teachers are experiencing. And then when are we going to need them completely off teaching because we've got huge amounts of staff that need their support.
That's great, Jenny. Thank you. Now, at the start, you made it clear that the teacher observers, the feedback does not go back to the manager. Now, there's a couple of questions around this. One, how do you get information for performance reviews? Second, who keeps the paperwork if not the manager?
Yeah. Well, the performance review, as I was saying, and it's probably, an example would probably help. It's not about saying to the teacher what you did right and what you did wrong. The performance review is about them reflecting on those three things: the profiling, grid, student results, and the observations that they've had, and actually developing their own goals that they want to try and achieve across the year. So we've left it up to the teachers to look at the feedback that they've had through the observations to formulate those goals. They might choose to share it with the manager during those conversations, or they may not, but there's no pressure for them to do so. We've given them autonomy around that, and I think that everyone's done that really well. I've forgotten the other.
Sorry,
the teacher developers hold on to the paperwork.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of making recruitment decisions, it is tricky. I have to be completely honest. There are times where I would love to know what the teacher developers are seeing in the classroom, but we've made that commitment, and I think that we're getting much more out of our teaching staff and much more for our learners and for our centre by, honouring that agreement. So decisions are made around recruitment based on what we see in every other aspect of the role.
And just to mention, the teacher developers can feed back to managers about centre needs. So we say, we've watched a lot of lessons and we think we need to put a lot of training in around these particular areas. We just can't give individual feedback on particular people.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Mark. We're nearly out of time, but I think we might squeeze in one last question. With facilitating the micro PDs, who's responsible for that? Who generally delivers the sessions?
Yeah.
It's shared.
Among
With
the teacher developers?
Yeah.
Okay.
So whoever's doing it does the research.
Yeah.
Okay. And
But,
is there...
Aparna,
Sorry, Jenny, go on.
In saying that, we do want to encourage teachers to be involved in presenting and running those sessions. So we have PD days where the teacher developers do a lot of coaching with our staff about presenting at those days. And likewise, if there was a theme coming up in the micro PD schedule that they felt that there was a specific teacher who was really well qualified to deliver that, that would definitely be encouraged.
Excellent. You've just preempted my question. So thank you, Jenny. Okay. So thank you for all those fantastic questions. We're out of time, but please keep those questions coming. You can email them to me and I can pass them on to Jenny, Mark and Susan. Thanks everyone for attending today on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm sure Wednesdays are not usually the best time, but Jenny, Susan and Mark, I'm so glad we could fit this in January. And I know there are people in the audience that have been waiting since December for the session. So I'm so glad we could make this happen. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.